Hello and welcome back to the Brew Corner. Today I'm doing a taste test of Morgan's Old, which it's still a young beer, and keep that in mind, I'm going to come back to that. So it's still a young beer, but I thought I'd give it a taste test. It's been in the bottle now just over a week. It's carved up nicely. I've already had a beer just to get my thoughts together, and I thought it's time for a taste test. It's also been out here in the garage for a couple of days, so let's see what it looks like, what it tastes like. A nice CO2 hiss there and some gas coming off, that's a good sign. I'm going to be a little bit heavy-handed with the pour just because it is a young beer. Really does need perhaps another week just to condition, but it looks a beautiful beer already. Look at that. Now on camera that probably looks very black, but actually if I hold it up to the light, it's a dark brown, reddish brown, like a dark amber colour, but for all intents and purposes it's black. A nice foam on the top, off-white head, tightly compacted, which is nice to see. So okay, what's the aroma like? Pure malt, that's it. Just a nice, like a fruity malt aroma. No hops at all. Okay, taste test. It's the same as the aroma. There's a lovely sweetness to this, and I think that's because I used 1.5 kilograms of amber malt, Cooper's amber malt, as the extra fermentables, and it's given it a really nice toffee-like sweetness, but only a slight sweetness. The overriding flavour is from the kit, the Morgan's Old, and it's fruity. It's like a raisiny fruitiness to it. There's maybe a hint of like an aniseed in there, just a hint, and roasted malts, like coffee-like roasted malts. You know, that's a really nice pint. However, I wouldn't call it an old ale. It just doesn't have the depth of flavour. It doesn't have that richness and the roundedness of an old ale. A flavour profile that you only get with months of storage, so that so that all those flavours can come together. This is a young beer, or in other words, what we would call this in the UK is a mild. Now if you don't know what a mild is, let me try and explain, but I'm going to have another drink first. Right, mild for centuries was the UK's most popular beer in the pubs, pub beer. Now if you go back to the 1700s, there was only actually two types of beer really in the UK. One was called young, remember I said to remember that word, young, and one was called old. Other names were mild and stale. So the only difference really is that the old beers had been stored and conditioned for a long period of time. The milds were fresh beers straight from the brewery. As such, they tended to have less complex flavours, lighter flavours, and they were cheaper than the olds. So they became very, very popular, and they were popular right into the 20th century. They were the most popular pint of beer in a pub in the UK. Now in 1914, I should point out that before 1914, these milds were typically about 4%, which is what this is, about 4% or 5%, occasionally 6%. But in 1914, with the First World War, the UK government brought in an alcohol tax. And to get around paying the alcohol tax, brewers dropped the alcohol levels of their beers. Not many people know, for example, that Guinness used to be a 7-8% stout. It's now, of course, nowhere near that. And that's a consequence of the First World War. With milds, because they were so popular and breweries were selling so much of mild, that they really dropped the alcohol level to 2.5%, 3%, 3.5, somewhere in that region. So the word mild took on a new connotation, whereas before it just meant young beer, fresh from the brewery, as opposed to an old beer. Now it meant mild flavour, because of course alcohol is a flavour enhancer. If you've got less alcohol, less flavour, and also mild in alcohol. But they still remained very, very popular because they were the cheapest beer on the bar by far. So everyone, especially the working man, would drink his mild. But all this changed in the late 1950s, 1960s, with the rise of the youth culture, the counterculture, the youth movement. Mild was seen as a drink that your dad drank or your granddad drank. It was a drink for the old people, and the youth of those decades didn't want anything to do with mild, and so the sales of mild started to nosedive. From being the most popular beer in Britain, they started slowly to decline. In fact, I remember in the 1980s, when I started going into pubs when I was 18, 19, I wouldn't be seen dead. I wouldn't be seen dead with a pint of mild. You would still see people drinking mild, but they were old people. I wouldn't be drinking a mild, I'd be drinking a lager. That's what young people drank. So I must be getting old now, because I like a mild. But as that older generation died off, the consumption of mild just died off with it. And today, you'd be hard pressed to find a pub that sells a mild. Certainly I don't think you'd find one that has mild as a regular tap, on tap all the time. They may have a mild as a special tap, but you would be hard pressed to find a pub really that sells mild. And in fact, you'd be hard pressed to find a brewery that brews mild, because there's just not the customer base anymore. But that said, with the rise of the independent breweries in the UK, I think I mentioned about those in one or two videos ago, we've got more breweries in the UK now per capita than anywhere. Some of those small breweries have started to reimagine mild, but not for marketing purposes, because it still has that stigma of being an old man's drink. So they market them as dark ales, they market them as black ales, but what it actually is a mild. And I think, in my opinion, that's what this is. Although Morgan's call it an old ale, and we've got to remember Morgan's is Australian. To Australians this could be an old ale. In the UK it just doesn't have that depth of flavour, that richness. It's a mild, but it's still a nice mild. Yeah, I like that. That's a nice beer. Would I brew it again? Probably not, because I could probably recreate it myself from dry malt extract in the kettle. So it's probably one I wouldn't particularly brew again. but it's a nice ale. And if you want to try a mild or an Australian old, yeah, give it a go. I think it benefits though from that 1.5 kilogram of the Cooper's amber as opposed to a bag of sugar or something like that. But it's a nice beer. Okay, thanks for watching. I'm going to spend the afternoon playing amateur radio, which is another one of my hobbies. And yeah, just have a nice relaxing afternoon. It's Saturday today for me, and I'll just enjoy myself on the radio. Whatever you're doing, I hope you enjoy yourself, and as always, I'll see you again in the next video. Bye bye for now.